Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on document accessibility. I'm Kieran, one of the accessibility consultants here at UserVision, and I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Manasvi.
Morning, everyone. My name is Manasvi, and I am an accessibility analyst with UserVision. And a lot of what we do in our day-to-day role is audit and test content, HTML documents, and all sorts of web content that's shared online. But a lot of what we come across is documents as well. PDF documents, Word documents, spreadsheets, all kinds of things. And so we know how important it is to be considering the accessibility of these kind of documents as well. And that's the reason we're all here today.
Perfect. So over the next hour, we're going to dive into what accessibility for documents looks like, and we'll hopefully understand how it can impact people, and of course, how we can make our documents more accessible for everyone, not just maybe people with disabilities and everything like that. We're happy to see everyone joining today. There's an awful lot of people here, so that's amazing. It's so exciting to see everyone's so enthused about this topic, so that's great. So please feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and we're going to set some time aside at the end to answer any questions. But just before we jump in, I'd like to do a little poll in the room to get a sense of how confident everyone feels about documents and making them accessible. So I'll just quickly launch that. We can have a wee look at that.
We'll just launch that, and you'll see that in your Teams. So just go ahead and put your answer in, and there you go. So you should see that on your team screen just now. And if you can just select one of the answers, and it'll be really interesting to know how many people feel that they're already making their documents accessible, if they feel like they don't know how they're going about it. And
yeah, and hopefully by the end of today's session, it'll go up. We hope. All
right, we're already seeing some responses. We've got a lot of somewhat comfortable, which is really good to see. People are already considering this. I'm sure that some of you here have some kind of previous knowledge about it and are here to learn more. We have some people saying uncomfortable, which is also great because that's what we're here to do. Our entire session is going to cover a lot about some practical tips that you can start taking, the action that you can start taking today. So hopefully by the end of the session, you will be feeling more comfortable and confident about your document accessibility. We're seeing some responses still coming in, but yeah, so
it's a good mix across the board. So that's it's good to see that there's a lot of people, as Manasvi said, about that are somewhat comfortable. So hopefully you're already putting things into practice, which is really exciting.
Great, that's very good. Thank you for that, and we'll just jump right into our session for today.
Brilliant, great. So, as I say, we hope by the end of today's session, you'll get a deeper understanding of how document accessibility affects users and practical strategies you can apply to craft your own documents to make them more accessible. So let's take, before we kind of dive into kind of practical tips, I'd like to go through some disability stats and sort of different user groups that are affected by poor document accessibility. Accessibility encompasses a wide range of disabilities, but we typically categorize them into sort of four main types of groups to simplify this approach. So there's visual impairments, so people with blindness, low vision, color blindness. There's also hearing impairments. So this includes deafness and hard of hearing. Motor impairments such as inability to move a mouse, limited motor control, tremors, kind of things like that. And there's also cognitive impairments, so things like learning disabilities, distractibility like ADHD, and dyslexia, and all that kind of thing. So just some statistics just to show you the extent of how important accessibility is. So in the UK, it's estimated that 1 in 5 people have a disability. So this represents a significant demographic that might struggle to use your product or service if accessibility isn't considered. So when designing websites, it's crucial to consider the accessibility needs of all users to ensure your service is genuinely accessible. But this is also so important to consider this when it comes to documents as well, as inaccessible content can drive users away to competitors who may provide better support. So if it's PDFs with a lot of information on it and that information isn't accessible, then someone maybe using a screen reader isn't going to be able to access that information. And moreover, ignoring accessibility can impact your business financially. So the spending power of disabled people and their families is estimated to be 274 billion a year, and businesses can lose approximately 2 billion a month by neglecting the needs of disabled people. So this includes physical access too, but it also highlights the huge amount of money a company can miss out on if they don't make their products or services accessible. So this data is from research by the Purple Pound. So just ensure that your documents and websites are accessible not only fulfills a moral and legal obligation that we'll touch on in a wee second, but also makes good business sense as well, because it's such a huge demographic of people that you might not be serving. So as I mentioned there about the legal obligation, so I'll quickly touch on the legal aspect of kind of document accessibility and digital accessibility in general. So what are the legal aspects that affect your public or private sector organisations? So sharing well, there's a legal framework in the UK that encompasses document accessibility aimed at ensuring equal access to information for all individuals, including those with disabilities. So the first one is the Equality Act 2010. It is an overarching anti-discrimination legislation ensuring equal treatment across a variety of domains and applies to all organisations, both public and private. Within the context of document accessibility, it mandates that information must be accessible to all users, including those with disabilities. This is includes digital and physical documents to make sure that they're accessible as well. And there's also the Public Sector Bodies Accessibility Regulations of 2018. So this requires that all public sector organisations ensure that their content complies with accessibility industry standards and guidelines, like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, commonly known as WCAG. There is a caveat that documents created before 2018 are exempt, but hopefully if you're working within the public sector, you'd like to make sure that your documents are up to date and accessible. And another legislation that's important to know about is the European Accessibility Act. So this comes into force next year in 2025. So the European Accessibility mandates that digital content and services across the European Union be accessible to people with disabilities. So this involves making sure that digital documents and content comply with the WCAG guidelines. So, which, as I mentioned, are the industry standard. So now, although the UK isn't part of the EU anymore, organisations that trade within the UK must also make sure that their products and services and documents are accessible. And lastly, there's the PDF UA, or PDF Universal Accessibility, which is an ISO standard that defines technical requirements for universal accessible PDF documents. This standard ensures that PDFs are accessible to users with disabilities, including those who use assistive technologies such as screen readers and braille displays. These requirements are complementary to the WCAG criteria, so ensuring that PDF documents that meet the standard are also compliant with this EU legislation. So it's a good place to start as well if you want to learn a wee bit more about PDF accessibility specifically. So all right, so we now understand why it's important to be thinking about document accessibility, but let's dive into some general best practices and general tips we can keep in mind when crafting any form of document, really. So these are sort of, as I say, just general tips you can apply across Word, PowerPoint, PDFs, everything generally. So we'll start off by having a wee look at links and how they affect your accessible documents. So actually, the first thing that we'll do is have a wee look at how screen reader users actually interact with documents and how they read through it. So typically they may use something called, as I say, as using a screen reader. So this just announces all the text that is on the screen, including, and then I'll also look at images and links and icons and everything like that and announce them as well. And screen readers provide different shortcuts to jump between elements on the page to quickly navigate through the page. So looking at headings and links and everything like that. We'll have a wee look at that in this video as well, just how they might navigate through the page. So I'll quickly play this video. Oh, there we go. So you'll be able to hear this now. Perfect. So I'll just play this wee video for you. And as I say, this is just how a screen reader would sort of navigate a page and how that's presented to them.
Page 1 Landmark Healthy Eating Habits Heading Level 2. Importance of Balanced Diet Heading Level 2. A balanced diet provides the right proportions of carbohydrates, fats, proteins, vitamins, minerals, and water necessary to maintain good health. Incorporating a balanced meal into your daily tips for healthy eating heading level 2. PDF document containing page 1.
And this is it just going through the links as well. So if a screen reader user presses the tab key, they will go through the interactive elements on the page. So this is something we'll delve into a wee bit more later on, but this is basically just announcing the links on the page by pressing the tab key.
Page 1 Landmark Healthy Eating Habits Heading Level 2.
There we go. Perfect. So just again, notice how the link text is announced. So it's announcing, kind of click here. So again, we're going to touch on this a wee bit later on or in the next slide, but basically it's just showing the importance of making sure that you have kind of good link text in there. So now let's focus specifically on these links. So when creating links, it's crucial to avoid generic or ambiguous phrases such as click here or read more. Instead, opt for more descriptive text that clearly indicates the link's destination. For example here, we've got learn more about hydration tips. So it's a lot clearer to users and also helps them know where it's going to take them as well. And also, secondly, avoid using kind of just the hyperlinks. So lengthy URLs can be confusing for screen reader users. So instead, use kind of concise and meaningful text, just that describes the link's purpose, just so they know where it's going to take them. So instead of having the URL, you can instead have visit the nutrition source website. So then you know all users can see that and go, okay, that's where that link's going to take me, and decide if they're going to interact with it or not. So in general, just ensure that your link text itself provides a clear idea of where it's going to take you. And as I say, it just helps all users, even those, including those with disabilities, but also those that are just also maybe using a mouse and just navigating like that. So next, we'll just discuss a little bit about using color in your documents as well. So color can be an extremely useful tool, but it's if not used carefully, can exclude many users, especially those with color blindness and low vision. So a key aspect of the color you choose is color contrast. So there are a wide variety of color blindness conditions that cause colors to appear the same. So so in this example here, we've got I'll just use my wee laser pointer. So in this example here, we've got the original colors that are the sort of nice pastel color. But if you're someone that maybe has red-green blindness, you can see here that it gets maybe a wee bit harder to see. But then if you're someone that has monochromacy, you kind of miss that. You miss that entirely. So it's just about ensuring that there is good color contrast when you're creating charts and everything like that within your documents, just to make sure that all users are able to understand what's being presented to them, and they're able to distinguish between different elements on the page. And also, don't rely on color alone. This is something that we're going to come on to in a wee bit, but just making sure that when you have your keys, just making sure that there's different indicators to help those user groups as well. So as I mentioned before, we're going to touch a wee bit on not using color alone to differentiate elements. So if you have links and buttons in your text, using a different color is not enough for all users to clearly identify them. Instead, use additional indicators such as underline patterns and textures such as bold, or adding icons to make it more distinguishable from its background. So For example, in this top example, we've got links here that for a sighted user without any color blindness is able to see, okay, so this is a link for Trello or Jira. However, if you're someone with that's colorblind, you might not be able to actually distinguish that blue from the black, and then it becomes quite difficult. So here we've added some extra styling to it, so underlines to make sure that it stands out, even if you're not able to distinguish between that sort of pink color and the black. Just the underline also helps these user groups understand that as well. And in this example here, we've used instead of having the original button that's just plain black on the button, instead we've used text shadows to make it pop out a little bit more. We've used bold, we've used icons, everything like that, just to kind of help it stand out a bit more, and just it's a lot clearer to all users, particularly those maybe with low vision or color blindness. So just a wee bit more on kind of images and more specifically alt text. So images can be a really useful tool to add context, clarity and meaning to your document, and also visual interest. But it's important to that users who can't see these images have access to the same intended values. So alt text, short for alternative text, is a brief description of the image that screen readers can use to describe the image to visually impaired users. So adding alt text ensures that users who may not be able to see these images can still understand the content and not miss out on any valuable information. Most content authoring tools will provide an option to add alt text. So we've got an example here of how to do it. So in this kind of bottom example here, if you just, so this is within, I believe it's PowerPoint. If you just right click on it and then go to view alt text, it brings up this panel here, and then you can input your what you want the alt text to be in there as well. But also in this example, because it's purely decorative, we've marked it as such, so that screen reader users, when they navigate to it, it won't be announced and won't cause that confusion, because it's just a picture of someone's dinner by the looks of it. So so it's just about making that judgment call between if you think that an image is contextually important, or if it is just purely to kind of make the document look kind of pretty and everything like that. So yeah, so if that is the case, just make sure that you're marking as decorative. You don't want to increase the audible clutter by just having all the images have a lot of alt text. It's better to just mark them as decorative if necessary. And also a little bit on the placement of images. So placing your images in a logical order that flows with the surrounding text. So aligning the images closely with the related text to provide better context and understanding. So many readers, especially those with cognitive disabilities or using a screen reader, may have difficulty linking the image with the descriptive text. So the context of the image may be lost, reducing its effectiveness in conveying that information. For instance, on the image of the Grand Canyon, the placement is immediately following the related text, i.e. the image showing the views is placed right below the text that's describing the view, and the image of the hikers on the trail is placed after the description of the hiking trails. And a logical placement of images can be particularly problematic for users relying on screen readers, as they may miss out on the visual context entirely, or struggle to match the image with their description. And also avoid text wrapping around images, as it can disrupt the reading flow for sighted users, but also some screen readers actually do struggle with when the text is wrapped like that as well. So it's better just make sure that your text is just straightforward and clear, the placement of it as well. And lastly, just ensure that the language in your content is accessible as well. So using language that's straightforward and the wording to improve the accessibility for a wide range of readers, including non-native speakers and individuals with disabilities who might find complex language confusing. This provides equal access to information regardless of language proficiency or cognitive ability, Also, an interesting fact, most BSL speakers, English is their second language, so may struggle with reading English if it's too maybe kind of verbose and just confusing. And also avoid jargon as well, so avoid jargon, technical terms or acronyms without explaining them beforehand. So defining complex terms and acronyms where first before going on to use them more regularly. This just prevents alienation of readers unfamiliar with specific terminology. And lastly, make sure that you organize content in a logical and clear manner, so with good kind of heading structure and that can break up the page and just make it clearer where information is, and it just helps with navigation just for all users again. So now that we've kind of ran through sort of some general best practices, we'd like to just give you another poll here, just to get an idea, to learn more a bit about how often you feel you implement these kind of things within your own documents. And yeah, we'll just.
So I think it's a good point to kind of understand, now that you've understood, like generally what are the things you should be considering. We'd like to know how often do you think you're actually sort of maybe knowingly or unknowingly implementing these in your documents. So I'm just going to launch another poll here, and it'll be great to see some responses. There you go. All right, we have some responses coming in now. We have quite a few always, actually changed over to often, and some rarelys as well, and a few never, which is quite interesting, but still good to know, because I feel like if these people, if people I feel like they're not using these tips, these general guidances that we've sort of talked about just now, they are actionable and they are straightforward enough to create that quick impact that you can start implementing in your documents today. So we have a lot of sometimes and often, which is really good to know. And the guidance that Kieran just took you through, as he said, is more general, and it really applies to any content that you're crafting, no matter what tool you're using. But in the next sessions, we'll be covering some tool-specific guidance, and just go there. Right, and we'll be talking about more specifically different content authoring tools that are quite common. People use word processors, spreadsheets, PDFs, and presentation softwares. So although the guidance and tips I'll be taking you through, I'll be using the Microsoft suite as the more general example, the guidance and tips do apply to other commonly used word processors as well. So maybe you're using Pages on Mac or even Google Docs. So I will be using examples from Microsoft, but the settings and sort of tools provided within the programs should be equivalently available in other commonly available tools as well. Sorry, programs that you might be using. All right. So to begin with, within Word or Pages or Google Docs or any other sort of text editing program that you're working with, carefully considering how you're formatting your text is really important. Because when you're crafting documents, it's essential that the formatting of the text is used correctly, because it can greatly impact the readability of your overall document, and the readability, the findability, and just how pleasing and easy it is for people to get to the information that they're trying to look for. So now, while it can be easier to format your text as you go, it's always better to use the built-in text styles from within the styles gallery. So as you can see here within Word over here, and you'll find something similar within Pages. I believe it's the Format tab. Within the ribbon on top of Pages, you have something called the Styles Gallery, and I'm sure you've seen this sitting there, but it's really good to actually make use of it. It contains styles that you can add your own styles to it. It's got different heading styles and titles and links and things like that. So instead of formatting your text as you're going through the document, try and use the provided heading styles there, and that really just helps maintain consistency as you go through your document. So that makes sure that you're not using different kinds of fonts, different places, you're not using different font sizes and different heading styles, and that can create a really confusing experience for users. So say you wanted your links to look a specific way, you can add that formatting within the document and then add it to your styles gallery. And then anywhere else in your document that you have a link, it's good to sort of apply that style from the gallery so that users who have sort of created this mental model of what elements look like, they're easily recognizable as they're quickly scanning through the page, and it creates an easy and predictable reading experience for people to identify content as they're going through. So maintaining that consistency can be quite important. Another thing to consider is avoid using all caps. Now, it can be tempting to use all caps when you say when you want to emphasize text, but it can actually be counterintuitive when you excessively use your caps when everything's emphasized, really nothing is standing out. So for example, in the example that I have over here, on the left, everything's capitalized, and not only can it come across to some users as aggressive, the tone can come across as a bit loud and appear as though you're shouting at them. Your please submit your application can come across differently, but it's the further implication is that in general, the readability of all caps is not very good because of the way the shapes line up. When things are in proper casing, they're just easier to read as well. So use all caps sparingly. So it can be used to emphasize certain text, but try to use it for shorter words and not just entire sentences and paragraphs that you're trying to highlight on the page. Another consideration, just as caps, is the excessively using bold and italics throughout your document. When you're trying to highlight and emphasize certain text, it's good to really pick out what you think is most important and then to apply your text styling sparingly and purposefully so that it's easier to read. As you can see in the example over here, please review the attached document. There's a lot of text decoration going on over there. And even in terms of using underlines, conventionally underlines is recognized as links. People tend to expect something to be clickable when they see it underlined like that. So use your underlines sparingly and where it makes sense, but most of all, people will expect your underlined text to be links. So try to avoid using underlines as much as possible. In terms of the font uses, sans serif fonts, as the one you see above over here. This would be an example of a sans serif font, and the example below it is a serif font. And serif fonts tend to be harder to read. And so if you're going for readability, if you want to improve the readability of your document, especially when there's large chunks of text, digital content, try and use serif fonts as they're easier to read. Let's talk about layout and spacing within your document. Try and break up your content into bullet points or numbered lists where it makes sense. Bullet points and lists provide clear visual separation between each item or point, and making it easier for users with certain visual and cognitive difficulties to distinguish between different pieces of information when they're laid out like that. Bullet points are also easier to scan, so it can be easier to find important information as opposed to if that's all put together, it's all sort of in one chunk of paragraphs. So break up your text, and that just makes it easier to find things and understand content and scan documents as well. Another consideration is using headings. Of course, headings are quite important. They're a very useful way to visually break your text apart. So for example, we've got here a document with many different sections of text, and they've been broken apart into different headings and subheadings. So we've got a document title on top over there, emergency plan, risk assessment. Oh, synced up to laser pointer well. So it's been broken up into a hierarchical sort of and logical sections, and that just helps users who are scanning the document identify the relation between all the different content, and the bullet points also help, as I said, it helps with the readability of the content and to quickly find important information. So for example, if you've got numbers over here, emergency numbers, those things can be hard to locate and identify quickly if they are not sectioned into under meaningful headings that they can quickly jump to. So use headings. Headings are extremely important and useful in creating a clear outline of your content. Another thing to consider when you are using spacing and layout, when you're trying to achieve a certain look on your document, is to use the inbuilt layout and spacing tools. So as you can see over here, if you're trying to achieve certain spacing, try not to just use the enter key to create line breaks or carriage returns or the tab key to create indents. Instead, try to use the inbuilt tools provided, as you can see over here, with spacing and page breaks. And most importantly, even there's a column layout provided within your most content authoring tools that can help section your content into different columns. And what we commonly try to do is, if we want something to say appear in 3 different columns on the page, we might decide to use a table instead. We might insert a table and then sort of make it invisible and achieve that sort of look. But that very quickly becomes problematic for screen reader users, because a screen reader does identify a table, and for a screen reader user navigating through the page, they are hearing and experiencing that content in perhaps a reading order that wasn't intended. And then, so instead, try and use the column layouts provided within the tool, and do not use table structures just for layout purposes. Tables really should just be used to present data and relationships and things like that. All right, going back a little bit to headings, because as I said, they are a very important element. Headings are more than just text styles, though. They can be applied for consistency and to break apart text, but they are also structural elements that provide an outline of the content and create meaningful hierarchy that makes it easier to navigate and understand. So while it's creating that visual hierarchy, using the inbuilt heading styles, as I pointed out earlier, from within the styles gallery, what that's actually doing is also creating this back-end structure to the document that is available to screen reader users. So while to me as a sighted users, it's good to have visual headings on the page, you really want to make sure that that same hierarchy and breakdown of the content is available to assistive technology. And the way to go about that is by using the default heading structures provided within your content authoring tool. So as you can see over here, the different heading levels, heading level 1, heading level 2, these are styles that when you apply them to the text, also create that outline in the background for screen reader users. Another thing to consider is the alignment of your text. Now, English, the general reading direction is left to right, and in that way, it is easier to read left-aligned text as there's a consistent starting point. As you can see over here in the example, the left-aligned text, our eyes tend to know exactly where the next sentence is going to start, and that makes it easier with the flow of the reading flow, as opposed to right-aligned text, which it can take a bit more effort and put a bit more strain on our cognitive load to try and get around it. And that can be particularly difficult for people with certain learning difficulties, people with dyslexia or with other cognitive disabilities. It's really important to make sure that text is visually as clear and as simple to read and process as possible, especially for people with certain visual processing disorders as well. So think about, as much as you can, stick to left-aligned text, as that's the easiest to read. What I'll do here is I'll just show you a quick video of how you can apply different heading styles, and you'll see how that changes the look of the document and how it creates that outline I was talking about as we go. So I'm just going to hit play there. believe it's because I have the laser pointer on. Bear with me 1 second. There we go. So what I'm doing is I'm going into the review tab and I'm just going to check navigation pane there, and that lets us see the heading structures that we have available in our document. So to start with, we don't have any headings, but as I go on and I start applying different styles from the gallery, you'll see them appear on the left over there. And I've applied a heading level 1 to the main title of the page. I've applied a heading level 2 to the subheading that falls, logically right after it. And further subheadings get heading level 3s. And you want to maintain that the visual hierarchy that you're seeing, you want to maintain that with the heading styles that you're applying as well. What I'll do here now is, what I want to point out is that you're not limited to the styles and the formatting that is available within the styles gallery. So after you've gone ahead and marked everything with your correct heading levels, you mark your links as links, you mark your emphasis with the emphasis style, you're not resigned just to that formatting. You can, in fact, change it. You can apply your own brand colors. You can apply your own fonts and font sizes. And once you have applied the styles that you're looking for, all you need to do then is go into your styles gallery, right click and update that style to match selection. And then what that does is, as you saw over here, is that just quickly updates all the elements in your document. I believe I could skip ahead. Gives you 1 minute. Well, what that would do is any of the text that you have marked as, say, a heading level 2 would immediately change and update them all in one go. So not only is that helping you maintain consistency, but also saves you a lot of time and effort when you're going around changing a lot of font formatting within your text. So use the built-in headings as they're very useful and very important. As you saw, it created that structure on the side. And for someone who is navigating your document with a screen reader, that would be a really helpful tool for them as well. All right, just quickly going over some document setup. As I mentioned before, screen reader users need that information and setup from the document in the backend. So make sure that you are creating concise and clear. You're setting the title of the document within the backend, so you can access that from going into the file info and setting a descriptive title over there, as opposed to just a file name, which isn't generally available to screen reader users when they're navigating through the document. Set the language of the document. It will be set by default to English, but if you're working with some different language, make sure you set that as well, so screen reader users know how to identify that language. We want to consider the headers and footers as well. As I said, headers and footers are not available to screen readers, so make sure you're not putting any important information within the header and just having that available in the document. Another useful tool is page numbers, as that can help screen reader users orient themselves, and really helps anybody orient themselves within large documents, say with hundreds of pages. So include page numbers and make sure you're not including any important information. Include a table of contents, as this can be an easy way for users to navigate through the page. And it's useful to know as well that the table of contents is really easy to insert into the page if you already have your heading structures set up, as you can see over here. So set up your headings and then include a table of contents as well, and that'll just make navigation a lot easier for everyone. All right, there's another tool provided within most Microsoft programs. It's called the accessibility checker. We won't go into much detail over here, but it's a useful tool to have to help you identify issues as you're going. But it's important to note that manually checking your document and just keeping best practices in mind is really the best way to go about it, as it won't detect all your issues for you. Jumping into presentations, a lot of what I said about layout and spacing does apply to the content within when you're thinking about presentation styling as well. Just as I said, within your document, Word document, you need to set a title so that that's available to screen reader users. Think about that for your other documents, no matter if they are spreadsheets or PowerPoint. Make sure these titles are descriptive. Another thing to consider is something called the reading order. Now, within Word, it's clear to us that the order that we see it is the order that a screen reader user would read through it. But within PowerPoint, you want to make sure that you are going into the accessibility settings and making sure that the elements that you have on the page, the images, the icons, and the text, is in the correct reading order as displayed visually as well. So match the visual order and the intended order that you want people to see and read through the documents. Make sure that that order is reflected in the reading order pane as well. Talking a little bit about adding text elements and images together. Try not to group elements, as when you export them as PDFs, they tend to export as single images and then that text information is lost. So keep them separate so that the text is readable when you export the image as well. And just by going into the settings, try and uncheck, well, make sure you uncheck automatically generated alt text, as that can be not very accurate, and you want to make sure that you are setting the alt text for these images yourself. Another important consideration specifically for hearing impaired users is that you are providing text alternatives to any audio and video content that you're adding on the page. PowerPoint has inbuilt captioning and subtitling tools, and there's also a free-to-use plugin called Stamp that you can integrate within PowerPoint to add these captions to your videos. So think about any audio video content that you're adding and that you're making them accessible to hearing impaired users as well. And as I said, these accessibility checkers are generally available in all of Microsoft's different authoring tools. Keep an eye out and work with the tool as you're going so that you can keep improving the accessibility as you work and not just at the end using the tool. All right, and that's about presentations. I'll hand over to Kieran to take you through some spreadsheets.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Manasvi. So yes, as Manasvi mentioned there, I'm going to run through some spreadsheet accessibility. So just to get started, just about kind of tidying up your spreadsheet for accessibility as you get started. So first, as we mentioned before, just make sure that you're setting the document title. So that's in Excel, that's just the same. So by just going to File, Info, and then Properties, and then setting the title, just so it's more descriptive and explains the purpose of the document. And also it's important to delete unnecessary sheets as well. So just so that it streamlines the document and makes it easier to navigate instead of users clicking on something and thinking, oh, there must be something in there, and then there isn't. And also, so it's just right click and then delete. I'm sure you all know that one. But yes, so the next one is just making sure that you rename your sheets to something meaningful. So by default, sheets are normally just sheet 1, sheet 2. However, they should be something more meaningful, like main expenses table or school fees table or whatever it may be, just so it's clearer for all users to know where the information that they're looking for is going to be. And also another useful tip for spreadsheets as well is providing instructions for users. So you can use the A1 cell, so the first cell on the page, to kind of provide instructions for the sheet in particular, or a certain table, or whatever it may be. So you can merge the A1 cell for clarity, so you can, just so it's clearer, so you can make it the full length of the table, and then it can provide information, useful content, like maybe expenses for each category to generate a pie chart, something along those lines, just so that all users know what to do with this information that they're being presented. And it's also important to note that, that when a screen reader user is using Excel, the first cell that they will land on will be the A1 cell as well. So it just immediately tells them what to do with this information and what the information is. And also always include kind of header rows, so something like category or price or whatever it may be, just so that the information that is in that column just makes sense to users as well. And we've spoken a wee bit about kind of alt text previously, but more specifically in this case, it's alt text for kind of charts and graphs. So make sure you're using alt text that aligns closely with the relevant data. So providing alt text is useful, but you don't necessarily, if it's a complex graphic or graph, you don't want to be describing everything. It can be more useful just to have maybe the top findings or whatever it may be, just so that screen reader users just immediately go, okay, so this graph, what's this graph telling me? Maybe it's the highest sales of the previous month or whatever it may be. And then you can provide the sort of full information kind of elsewhere, whether that be just the chart it's generated from, or maybe just a bit of a wee blurb underneath it in a separate cell. And also it's important to ensure good color contrast. So make sure that the contrast between the text and the background is clear. If you're putting text on maybe within your chart, and make sure that that kind of pops out. And also avoid using kind of color alone. So in this example here, we've not just got the green, but we've also got the sort of percentages and everything like that. We've got the text saying like, this section is for green, this section's for brown, this section's for red, everything like that, just so that it's clearer for all users, but more specifically, maybe those that are colorblind, just to differentiate between those sections. And a little bit about kind of spreadsheet readability. So the first thing is just making sure that there's good spacing in your cells as well. It just makes it easier to read and just more easily navigatable and just easier for users immediately coming to it and going, okay, so that's what that cell is for. You can also implement the freeze pane for easier navigation. So it keeps the header row or column visible as you scroll, so you don't have to keep scrolling up and down, which can be useful for for users that maybe with cognitive disabilities, that maybe they might forget what the row is for and everything like that. So it just keeps it there in particular. So and the last thing is just adding in kind of zebra striped rows. So adding in it just makes it easier to know which row you're in. So this is quite easily done by just going to selecting your table range, going to the home tab and then format as table, and then just choosing the style that you want the table to be in. But it's also important to make sure that you're not choosing something that's just going to make the text within the rows that are maybe grayed out. You can still read the text as well. And lastly, just make sure that you're, again, as Manasvi mentioned, just make sure that you're using the accessibility checker as you go, just to kind of make sure that you're fixing things as you go along. You don't want to be having a lot of work to do right at the end when you just want to get the document sent out or whatever it may be. So next up, I'll talk a wee bit about kind of PDFs. So it'll be the last thing that we kind of discuss today. So PDFs are often regarded as as the most inaccessible document format. This is because they're typically not created with accessibility in mind and can present significant barriers for people using assistive technology. So it can be quite difficult to actually make PDFs accessible, but we'll go over some quick tips now to hopefully try and, when you're next working with PDFs, to try and make it as accessible as possible. So the first thing to think about is just the document structure and the tags. So ensuring your source document is accessible with things like proper headings, lists, and tables, and that they're all formatted correctly. That structure can pull through into your PDFs. So then it kind of creates a good foundation to work from. However, it's important to make sure that you don't just assume because your Word document was accessible when you've exported it to PDF, you can't just assume that it's also accessible. You also need to go in and just do your additional checks with a screen reader and your automated checks and everything like that as well. And another thing to do is just making sure that you're using your tags correctly. So tags are just sort of hidden labels that define the structure of a PDF document and explain what things are, such as headings and figures, to screen reader users, so that will be announced as such when they navigate to them. So without proper tags, screen readers might not be able to understand what the element that they're interacting with is. So the best way to do that is just by going into the tag tree within Adobe, the Adobe Suite and just looking at that in there as well, just make sure that everything's set up correctly, and then you can edit that as appropriate. And the next thing is just ensuring, as Manasvi mentioned a wee bit earlier on, is just ensuring a logical reading order for screen reader users. So make sure that it follows the natural reading order, so left to right, top to bottom, if you're an English speaker. And this can be edited within the order pane within Adobe Acrobat. So as you can see here, there's this is the order pane, and then you can just move things about as appropriate. So because obviously you don't want things to jump from the header down to this information down at the bottom or whatever it may be. So just make sure that you're got the correct reading order there. And lastly, just make sure that you're still testing with a screen reader, just to double check that the reading order is going to be correct and that things are presented correctly. And the next thing is just ensuring that your forms and interactive elements are accessible. So just making sure, firstly, that you're creating form fields that can actually be edited. So this can be done by just going into All Tools, Prepare for Accessibility, and then Identify form fields to detect, and then you'll be able to actually edit them by just typing in. From my experience recently filling in PDFs, I had to put in a text box on top of it and then type it into there, which can be even more frustrating if you're maybe a screen reader user or anything like that. So this way it just makes sure that you can just tab to it right away and then start typing in there. And it's also useful to add in kind of tooltips for forms. So adding tooltips to provide information on maybe kind of the date format or whatever it may be. So this can also be done by just going to Properties, General, and then Tooltips to add in a descriptive tip in there. And lastly, just ensure that your elements make sure all the elements are keyboard accessible. So make sure that a keyboard user is able to tab around, navigate around, and interact with links or buttons, or in this case, just forms as well. And lastly, just making sure that you're using the accessibility checkers, so the built-in accessibility checkers. So as we mentioned before, this is just another tool for your toolbox, just to make sure your documents as accessible as possible. And it just gives sort of flags to similar kind of things we mentioned before, like missing alt text and things that haven't been tagged correctly. And just again, make sure that you're doing manual checks as well, just to make sure that your document is accessible, because you can have nothing coming up in an accessibility checker and there still be accessibility checks there that you need to be done. So just keep that in mind. And lastly, so just a wee kind of quick summary. I know we've had a bit of a whistle-stop tour of document accessibility, but I'll just go do a quick summary. So firstly, just ensure that there's a clear structure to your document. So regardless of the document, make sure that you've got good heading structure, good file titles, slide titles. Make sure the language is concise and clear and you've explained everything correctly, and provide accurate instructions for users so they know what to do with the document. Ensure the content is perceivable and can be understood by all users. So regardless of if they can actually see the content or interacting with it using a screen reader, just make sure that there's things like meaningful alt text or good contrast for maybe those with difficulty with color contrast, and make sure that you're not using color alone. All of these kind of things are so important just for how people perceive the document differently. And also use your accessibility checkers throughout to catch any accessibility issues. It's such a useful tool, just to make sure you do it as you go along. And as you don't want to have a million issues right at the end that you need to work through. And lastly, just think inclusively. So when designing documents, think about how different user groups will interact with your document. Ensure that is the widest possible audience is going to be able to actually interact with it. So hopefully you can now take some of these tips away and implement them in any documents that you're working on. So just before we finish up, we'd like to just do one last wee poll with you, just to see how confident you are now and see if kind of today's session is improved that at all. So
yeah, so we've kind of zoomed through a lot there, but hopefully that's helped out. And I'm just gonna put another poll into the chat just to get an idea of where we started. And there we go. Right, so if you can just put some responses into the chat. All right, so we've got a lot of people saying somewhat comfortable, and we even have some people saying that they're quite comfortable now. They feel quite confident in their ability to make that. Oh, and few people saying, at least 11% saying very comfortable. So that if we just refer back to the start of the session, there were actually a lot more people saying that they were somewhat uncomfortable. So about 25% people saying somewhat uncomfortable, and now really only 3%. And we're seeing a lot more people saying that they're actually very comfortable. So that's really encouraging to see, actually, that even though we've kind of just touched upon very briefly, gone into some details and tips about document accessibility, that even with just this session alone, people are leaving with an idea of what they can be doing immediately, in fact, to make the document more accessible. So that's really great to see. And but as I said, it's we've kind of just zoomed through a lot, and we talked about accessibility checkers, and we didn't really get into the detail of it. And there's a lot more nuance that goes into document accessibility, especially talking about compliance, as we mentioned during talking about legislation, how to meet those compliance ratings. So what we have is actually a full day training course available, actually coming up in November, for anyone who's interested in really diving deeper and getting right into document accessibility, into the nitty-gritty of it. And a full day training course for your team or your organization could really help with that. We'll be using interactive sessions and hands-on activities. So really getting into a deeper understanding of document accessibility with a full training course. We have a special discount for our audience today. As you see on the left over here, I've paused over here to feel free to take a screenshot or a quick picture, but all this information will be available on our website as well, uservision.co.uk. And we have a special 10% discount for any bookings really that you make for any of our training courses or upcoming trainings or webinars that we have on our website. So feel free to just put that in your notes. A quick mention here as well is our accessibility accreditation program that we have recently launched. We offer an accreditation program that's specially designed to help organizations demonstrate their commitment to inclusive design through an recognized accreditation badge, and through the use of we would provide a detailed compliance and accessibility statement. And really, if you'd like to know more, again, just take a quick screenshot of the QR code there. And yeah, but that's not all. We're really glad to have everybody join our webinar today, but we do have a lot coming up in the future as well, as you see over here on the screen. Just going into September, October, November, lots of courses and trainings to do with accessibility and the nuances of it, as well as the full day training course for document accessibility coming up on the 19th of November. As I said, feel free to visit our website, www.uservision.co.uk, and you'll find all this information there ready for you. And yeah, we just, if anybody has any questions, of course, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll be happy to address them. Yeah, we're really happy that everybody joined today, and if there's any questions.
So we've got one here that is, someone's already answered our question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to just go?
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of mentioned what's some good apps is like. It would be the one we go to right away is just always NVDA normally. Yeah, that's what we use for our testing as well. It's NVDA. It's free. I think it's open source and everything like that. So yeah, that would be our go-to. But is there any more kind of questions? And then I think if you've got any questions you think of later on, please just send us a wee email as well. Always happy to
start a conversation. Yeah. Feel free to just email us, and we'll definitely get back to you.
Yeah. Definitely.
And again, just to let you know, there is a recording of the session that will be available after the session ends in the chat.
Any chance of a guide that shows how to use Adobe functionality to validate PDFs, please? So that'll probably be more on our
a big part of our course, more hands-on, getting into, I know PDF, as Kieran said, is a complicated topic, and really talking about PDF accessibility requires a lot of hands-on training. So if you are interested, feel free to look up the details of our course, and thank you.
But in general, it'll be just under tools within the Adobe suite, and then just prepare for accessibility. And then a lot of the checkers will be in there. But if there's no more questions, then thank you all very much for coming today. So a lot of people. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great. This has been lovely for us, and we will hopefully hear from some of you. And thanks again.
Thank you so much.